Because clearly there's a lot of legalese in all of this, and the fact that the president, the executive of the United States, can, if you will, leapfrog the mayor in this case. And you heard her plea for statehood, and yet, as she says, she's following the law, and that executive order means that they now have to report to the White House. How much authority does the president have here, and for how long?
Okay, so it breaks down pretty easily, and the rule of law is pretty outlined here. So there's a little bit of gray area, but fortunately not a lot here. So this comes under the D.C. Home Rule Act, and for conditions of an emergency nature, the president can federalize the Metropolitan Police Department for up to 48 hours. He can extend that if he gives a 30-day notice to Congress. So we're dealing with here at a worst case scenario, I believe, at about 32 days.
Okay, so 32 days. We heard from the U.S. Attorney General, from Jeanine Pirro, saying that the problem is not so much the efforts that are going to be on the streets now. It's on the back end. It's the prosecution of this, because you still have to deal with the local legislation, which gives those sentencing guidelines. And much of this crime that's happening now is at the hands of juveniles, and they're set by that legislation. So, Joseph, what does that mean on that end as it comes to prosecutions?
So they are also taking or attempting to take action. President Trump wants to lower the ability for juveniles to be, or wants to heighten the ability for juveniles to be tried as adults. But there's still a whole lot of legislation there. The criminal law process takes time in America because of our due process system. It does unfortunately take time. Now, can Trump extend beyond the 48 hours in the 30 days? He could, as we saw what he did in Los Angeles, but it would take, I think, more heightened conditions. For instance, invasion, rebellion, and if he could argue that he can't enforce federal law. I don't see that happening in D.C. I see this, like I said, being limited to the 32 days. Can they then therefore increase money and funds to prosecutors to deal with this glut of new cases so that they can actually have successful prosecutions? I believe that would follow in suit. You can't just crack down on crime, so to speak, and then not follow through with prosecution.
Can you hear me now? There you go. I think I misspoke. It's the U.S. Attorney for D.C., Jeanine Pirro, making that case. And speaking to the Attorney General, Ken Gray, we have this interesting situation here in D.C. where it's the Attorney General that prosecutes these juveniles. And it seems as though what the D.C. Attorney for the U.S. Attorney for D.C., Jeanine Pirro, is saying is she's basically, her hands are tied. She can't do anything. These juveniles, they commit these crimes. They're violent crimes, then they're let go, and it's a recidivist circle. They're back again. And then you hear what Joseph is saying. Well, if you can't prosecute them, then what's an arrest?
Yeah, absolutely. Marina, you put your thumb right on the problem. The 14-year-old to the 17-year-old, those are really outside the reach of the federal government. For federal law enforcement, they would turn those over to the locals to prosecute. So federalizing this will not fix the 14 to 17-year-old problem. What will is legislation, and legislation will not solve the problem within 30 days. By the way, Congress can extend this past 30 days, but it would take an act of Congress to get past that 30-day mark.
Yeah, and they're on recess in August, and we've seen how eager they've been to act on other pretty big ordeals. I can't imagine they would come back to deal with the situation with D.C. But, Joseph, we heard the president allude that this is an approach that he wants to take in New York, in San Francisco. Unique here is the situation of home rule, and which is why the president has been able to act. It would not be that easy to do it in other major cities for the president.
Correct. So he... in D.C., he could utilize the Home Rule Act, which is unique to D.C. In the other cities, he'd have to rely on either the Federal Service Law Act or the Insurrection Act. And again, for the Federal Service Law, he would need invasion, rebellion, or the ability to say, look, we can't enforce federal laws. Therefore, I need to federalize and bring in the National Guard here. The Insurrection Act, you literally need an insurrection. So people actively trying to overthrow the government. We saw this play out in Los Angeles, and one might be thinking now, was that kind of a test run, or will it end up being sort of a test run if President Trump continues along this vein?
Ken, I think a lot of people, you heard the mayor say, we need all law enforcement to be visibly law enforcement so that people know that these aren't the so-called jump out squads or undercover police that are just jumping out on them, to make sure that they're named, if they're FBI, that they have that they wear it. The FBI, a lot of these agencies not used to beat patrolling, and now in effect that's what they'll be doing at some of these hot spots. How effective can these next 30 days really be?
So an increase in foot patrols in these areas may make the people in that area feel safer. Even if they won't be effective against reduction in crime, they still could make people feel safe in those hotspot areas. And so increasing the number of bodies in there, and Metro has 3,100 officers right now. They're down. Another 500 federal law enforcement officers will increase that enough to be able to perhaps have a presence in those hotspots and make people feel safer there. But as far as long-term effects, I'm not sure it's going to be that effective. When you look at the crime stats, in actuality, crime stats have been going down in D.C. like they have been around the country, except for aggravated assaults. Stats lagged by a year, so we're comparing 24 versus 23. And 2023, the summer of 2023 in D.C., you had crime going through the roof during the summer months.
And yet per capita, D.C. still has a pretty high crime rate. Sure, there's been a reduction. I think to the mayor's point, that's something that she's not going to let up on. But to your point, how sustainable is it when you've got a police department that's got so many vacancies? They're over 2 million hours in overtime. Can they keep federal partners on staff, if you will, helping them? Or is this a recruitment issue? I mean, in the end, what solves the crime problem?
So the FBI has been part of working with the Metro PD for years on task forces. And so there is a long-term cooperation between the two in certain crime areas. Violent crime, for instance, to name just one such area. Also cold cases. Federal agents have been working on the cold case squads there for years. But long-term, I don't know if the FBI wants to put their resources into foot patrols for D.C. on the long term. But nonetheless, they'll do whatever they're told to by DOJ and by the president.
Yeah, it seemed as though that's why we had Kash Patel and obviously Pam Bondi there behind the president, at least showing that they're together in this. Jeffrey, before we go, we talk about sustainability, the law, these 32 days that you predict this will go without the necessity of going to Congress and asking for an extension. What happens after that? Do we move on? I mean, is there anything else for the president to do other than asking Congress for help?
It looks like this is limited to 32 days, with the initial 48 hours and then the 30-day extension. He could pursue congressional legislation to make things more permanent. I don't think that he'll get a lot of cooperation for that. I mean, it is theoretically possible that he could renew his emergency after, some time has passed and kick the whole process again and keep it going indefinitely. I will also say that there's nothing stopping him at any point in time for deploying the FBI, the ATF, and the U.S. Park Police in D.C. That's a normal situation. It has been done without invoking the Home Rule Act. So I would see probably a beefed up presence in that area. That's one way in which he can continue to sort of pinpoint this. Also, people are talking about there has been a decrease, but homicide rate rates, vehicle crimes, and juvenile crimes are still much higher compared to other metropolitan cities.
Oh, yeah, per capita, they absolutely are. And if you look at the numbers pre-pandemic, they are much higher than they were there. And clearly there was a spate in 2023. Regardless, the continuation of crime is something that no city wants to see. And I think the mayor, regardless of politics, has said she's on board with this. She wants to see the reduction. And I think that's what was telling from the press conference. There wasn't as much pushback, but to everybody's point, it seems as though the Home Rule Act is in effect and she doesn't really have much of a choice. We'll see what happens at the conclusion of that. Kenneth Gray, Jeffrey Tully, we appreciate, Joseph, I apologize. We appreciate both your expertise on all of this. And of course, we'll continue to watch this as this is now a new day here in D.C.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay with us. The DMV Zone back after this.
Enerpac low-height hydraulic cylinders are versatile and durable. And with several models to choose from, there's an